So this doctrine that was developed after the war, um, one of the things that von Seck wanted to do was he wanted to push it down as far down the officer chain as he could, because he wanted to get into the mindset of German officers. And by the way, the German army after Versailles is only, I think, about 100,000 men. But one of the things that von Seck did was he used the shrinking of the German army to fire all the incompetent generals, and officers, and he only kept the people, the officers that he thought were talented. So it turned out to be an advantage in a way. So when the whole thing is that when Hitler comes into power in the 30s, uh, this doctrine has been fully developed. It wasn't developed for him, but he's there to make use of it. So anyway, so the idea is that your NCOs, your lower ranked officers, everybody has this idea of decision making. There's this myth that the German army, if you killed, let's say, if you killed a platoon leader, the rest of the platoon wouldn't know what to do because they came from authoritarian countries and they'd be directionless. This may have been true of the Japanese, actually, to a slight extent. It wasn't at all true of the Germans. If a higher officer got killed in a small German unit, someone else would step forward and have a clear idea of what to do. And so tactically, as I said, the German army was very skilled, well trained, had a good idea of how it wanted to act on the battlefield. So the whole idea of the German army was to brief the entire chain of command, from the NCOs all the way to the top, on the goals and time frames of an upcoming mission. And that allowed commanders on the spot to make tactical decisions based on the overall desirable outcome. And so what this did is it reduced the reliance on the higher headquarters to folks during World War I were always waiting for the headquarters to give them orders, and it took forever. And it was one of the problems in fighting World War I from the German point of view, and they want to remove this, and they want everybody involved to know what the overall goal is, so folks could make a decision on the spot. So anyway, I think it's very, very interesting. And there's another quote of von Seck which I really like, which is, I just think is fascinating. From the mission and the situation arises the decision. And that becomes kind of the motto of the German army. From the mission and the situation arises the decision. And it's what I've been talking about for the last couple of minutes. So folks know the overall goal of an attack, but the situation is going to change once folks start fighting. So you have a sense of the overall goal, but you may go in with an idea of how you're going to achieve it, but that may change as the fighting, and you've got to adapt to that change, and you may see an opening that wasn't anticipated, and then you have to take advantage of that opening. I hope I'm not getting too excited about the German army, but I do find it interesting, very, very interesting, like I say, how institutions think and how they can learn from their mistakes. They seldom do, but sadly and tragically, the German army did after World War I. Now, there's another surprising aspect to the German army after World War I. It made an alliance with, of all countries, the Soviet Union. And there was a reason for this. Right after World War I, both Germany and the Soviet Union were pariah states. Now, Germany's not controlled by Hitler yet. It's a very frail democracy. But so they're both pariah states. And in the early 20s, you have a 3-year agreement that's signed by both parties, the Soviet government and the German government, which allows Germany to develop and test tank tactics on Soviet soil. So you've got this crazy situation where German officers are going into the Soviet Union, secret places in the Soviet Union, and testing these new tactics that I've been talking about for the last couple of minutes. And so they do this. They do it in small numbers because they don't. The German High Command doesn't believe that you need a lot of numbers to do this, and they don't want to. They're doing this under the radar. Now there'd be satellite images and that kind of a thing, because they don't want the Western powers to know that the German army is rethinking its doctrine. So it was discovered and it was exposed by the Manchester Guardian, a newspaper in England, because some illegal artillery shells were sent to Germany actually by the Soviet Union. Very ironic. So what you had is that because of the shortage of supplies, the German army had to use bicycles with fake wooden tanks built around them to test this armor doctrine. But again, it kind of really didn't matter. It wasn't, they're just kind of testing the tactics. So what you have in the early 1920s are German soldiers riding bikes with tanks built around them on Soviet soil, testing these new tactics that are going to be used against the Soviet Union 2 decades later. So what you have then is, after World War I, this incredible moment where the German army decides to rebuild, rethink its doctrine, rethink its tactics, not at the service of Hitler, because Hitler is not around yet, but Hitler will take advantage of this new thinking when he gains power in the 1930s. Okay, so let's move to Hitler. I'm not going to talk much about Hitler gaining power. He had fought in World War I. He had been gassed. He comes out of World War I very angry at the German defeat. He's a big proponent of the stab in the back theory, that Jews had stabbed the German army in the back, and that's why Germany had surrendered when it didn't really have to surrender. He gains a group of National Socialists around him. He tries to lead a coup or a push in Munich in the early 1920s. It's easily defeated. Unfortunately, he's not executed by the German government, but he's put in jail. And when he's in jail, he writes his famous Mein Kampf, which actually is still read today in many right-wing circles. So I want to talk about Mein Kampf for a second, because Hitler is not someone that really was very secretive about what his overall goals were. In Mein Kampf, what he spells out a couple of key things. First of all, there's a global conspiracy of Jews to take over the world. And for Hitler, Jews and communists are the same people. Now, it is true that a number of the Bolsheviks had come from Jewish heritage, although, of course, they weren't religious. But when Hitler looks at the Soviet Union, he sees communists and he sees Jews. And he sees communist Jews, or Jews are communists, right? So not only is Hitler full of racial hatred that Jews are, and again, I'm talking about horrible things. These are not what I believe. They just have to be described. We have to understand this. He thinks Jews are subhuman. He thinks they're like a vermin in society, that they take down society, that Jews have gained too much power, and that they're going to, if they could, going to be at the vanguard of making the entire world communist. So for Hitler, it's this race hatred that's fused with this anti-communism, because he sees most communists as being Jews, or he sees the leader of the communists being Jews. So this is spelled out in Mein Kampf, and also that the Jewish population of Germany, which had been very, very integrated into the World War One, many Jews had fought quite bravely in World War One against the British and the French and later the Americans. But for Hitler, that doesn't matter. Um, so he's a proponent of the stab in the back theory. Let's look to Eastern Europe and Russia. Hitler is also a proponent of the Lebensraum, the living room theory. The population of Germany, I don't have the numbers at the top of my head now, but it was by far the largest country in Europe. And Hitler thought that Germany needed to become an empire, that it needed to become an empire. It needed more land. He didn't think that France actually would do the job. He didn't think that France had enough territory. Hitler actually admired the British. He actually tried to make peace with the British, although I don't know what that peace would have meant after the capture of France. So, but Great Britain's too small, for this Lebensraum, and so he looks to the east. He looks to Poland. He looks to Ukraine, which at the time was part of the Soviet Union, and he wants to capture the satellite countries of the Soviet Union, such as the Ukraine, such as the Baltic states. He wants to capture Poland, and he wants to create a German empire there. He wants living room, living space. And what he basically wants to do, and he's quite serious about this, he will starve to death the people that live in those territories, and he will resettle the depopulated territories with Germans. He's already thinking about mass extermination, but he hasn't kind of hit upon the gassing of folks and the kind of horrors that we'd see during the war. But very, very early on, Hitler is fomenting against the Jews, and he's looking towards the Soviet Union, the satellite states of the Soviet Union, also parts of Eastern Europe, that the populations of those regions will be exterminated and be resettled by Germans. Lebensraum. So it's land, and as with Japan, it's also natural resources. So when Hitler looks at the Soviet Union, he sees Jews, communists, the same thing in his mind. He also sees opportunity, land to create a German empire. And he's not someone, like I say, that's very secretive. He writes about this in Mein Kampf, and he's not kidding around, as we will see and as we know.